Sky, Pennies for the Ferryman, and the recently released Spirals of Destiny Book 1, Rider. Today, I'll be reviewing Airship Eagle by Anthony Fernandez. When I first saw it, I thought it would be steampunk, but it's not really. There are airships in it, but it's more of a dystopian take on the past with a heavy reliance on magic, and that provides the tyrannical, oppressive government. The bulk of the story starts in the 1930s and proceeds forward to the 1970s, though it's a technologically regressed 1970s. On the author's website, there's a YouTube video trailer that you can watch, along with a sample from the story. Overall, I'm going to give this story 3 stars out of 5. It had elements that sparked my interest, but there were some definite issues I had with the story. I'll start with the good first. The slow transformation of the United States was well presented. It wasn't just an overnight occurrence where the characters wake up and see the stars and stripes are no longer flying. It's a process that takes decades, with most saying that things seem better as if they're trying to convince themselves. A small portion of the populace knows what's going on, but are cowed into submission by the magically powered airshipmen, whose sense of right and wrong is usually justified by how much power they wield. A very select few are actually resisting and doing something about it. That brings us to the main character, Carl Dreschler. He's a member of the Coast Guard, which is being phased out of existence by the presence of the magical airships. Like many leading characters, he has hidden secrets in his past that will come to the forefront. He also has an angry sidekick named Polly, who is very visible in his dislike of the arrogant airshipmen. Starting with Carl's father's death at the hands of the sister ship to the Titanic, Carl's life is something of an enigma. People, such as his aunt, disappear from around him, and his lifestyle is curtailed by the actions of the airshipman bureaucracy on several occasions. All paths lead to the villain Victor Van Horn, who has his suspicions about Carl that he'd like to confirm. Carl evolves from a man trying to roll with the unfortunate changes into the ad hoc leader of the Scrap, which is what is known as the Resistance in this novel. I also like the author's magic system. Technology and development interferes with the ability to wield magic, so the airshipman president of the United States has an agenda for rolling back the industrial age and limiting growth of the urban cities. Much of the magic is born out of the affinity the user has with nature and specific animals. Here's what didn't do it for me. There were several parts where I thought, okay, they've pushed Carl too far this time. He's going to snap and bust out a can of whoop ass any second now. We know from the prologue that Carl's father knew that Carl had a great power, so it's going to be showing up at any moment, right? Well, roughly the first half of the book passes before that moment finally happens, and for me that was a real buzzkill. It was over 73,000 words before the hero answers the call to arms and demonstrates the first hint of what he can do. And if you add up the list of all the things that have been taken from him at that point, and I won't include any spoilers here, but it's pretty impressive and in my opinion long past the point where a reasonable man would have lost it and acted out. By that point I was somewhat apathetic and I wanted to see something happen. Anything. The strange thing to me is that Carl knows he can sense magic, and he has some ability, but he never seems to investigate how to use this to help protect the people he cares for. He admits as much to a girlfriend named Alice in 1940, but the dramatic confrontation I mentioned earlier comes several years later. Books of magic keep getting mentioned here and there, and after a time it doesn't become Chekhov's gun, it becomes Chekhov's virtual arsenal. It makes little sense to me why Carl barely delves into this throughout the years. With the notable exception of 3 females, I also saw no other magic wielders other than men. Where are the airship women? It seemed like a bad oversight on the author's part. Some were in parades and referred to as housewives wearing cloaks, but the airshipmen are uniformly male. The Van Horn character is presented as utterly ruthless, and several examples are shown, but he generally tiptoes around Carl with kid gloves. Van Horn eliminates rivals, orders entire towns depopulated, kills random children, but it's like an episode of an old Star Trek series where the expendable red shirts pile up, but the main characters, with the exception of Polly, remain relatively unscathed. I could have used more explanation of Van Horn's motivation to really give me the depth that I was looking for in the villain. I also think the author missed some milestones in Carl's development. Each time he and his wife have a child, it's covered in but a single paragraph. It's mentioned almost in passing. With all the details about the boats, the small jobs, and the depredations of the airshipmen, Carl's immediate personal life really gets a short shaft in this story, and I think it would have enhanced Carl's character had a greater uh, attention been given to this. I wasn't sure what to think when the timeline advanced to 1965 and we become reacquainted with Mike Lauren, who is the focus of the story for a few chapters. It really pulled me away from the narrative. The oppressive government and its collaborators begin to take his life away as well, but I'll give Mike some credit. He starts to game the system from the inside and exacts a measure of revenge. The ending kind of left me flat. Obviously, it sets up a sequel, but I have some issues with it that I can't go into without a number of spoilers. I'll just say it left me scratching my head. Overall, it's a decent read on the Kindle or other electronic format and priced for value at $2.99. Had I paid the full $18 paperback price, I probably wouldn't have felt that I got my money's worth. In the interest of disclosure, I received it free from Smashwords with a coupon provided by the author in the Amazon forums in exchange for reviews. The positives are the interesting magical theories and the civilization that the author presents. The negatives are the slow developing plot, missed opportunities for character growth, and some of the inexplicable decisions that the characters make. My recommendations to the author for the sequel are to tighten his plot lines, get to the action sooner, and look for areas to add greater levels of depth to his characters. It's a solid first authoring from a new author, and I suspect his writing skills will only improve with time. Tony was nice enough to answer some emailed questions for me, so let's do a quick author interview. Sadly, he gets the mechanical voice treatment. First, let me thank you for taking my questions. What inspired this book, and how many books do you plan on in the series?
The story was inspired by the accounts of Britain's airship days and the tragedy of the R101 that ended them. The golden age of airships was an important historical time. Airship Eagle began as more of an alternate history, rather than something intended for the steampunk genre. There will possibly be a third book, though that isn't for certain yet.
Alright, tell us about your magic system and how you came up with it.
The magic system was actually added after the first drafts. Originally, it was going to be strictly an alternate history about the oppressive nature of an arrogant tyrannical government. But the story felt flat and lacked depth. The fantasy element allowed me to do something different than I had done before, since all my previous writing projects had been science fiction.
With the focus of the story on America and Europe, I was wondering about the rest of the world. Are there any technological enclaves out there?
That's where the influence and power of the Four Saints came in. Any country that became too advanced to suit Europe's airshipmen and threatened their status was dealt with by the Saints. Though I only touched on this briefly in the first book, the real power of the Saints becomes a bigger part of the story in the sequel. Also, because of the influence of the Saints, there were no World War Z advances in weapons and technology that resulted from wartime research never happened. Worldwide, technology developed at a much slower rate even without the threats and interference of Europe's airshipmen.
Okay, when do you think you'll be publishing the sequel? And talk to us about your writing history and who your influences were.
That's hard to say. I usually work with a highly detailed outline, which is still in progress. It will be at least a year before it is ready to be published. I've been writing for about 20 years, on and off. I have many unfinished novels to revisit after this series is complete. Or I might work on something new. Keith Roberts definitely influenced Airship Eagle. Kite World is my all-time favorite novel. I love his writing style. Ray Bradbury has also influenced me, and I think some of the horror aspects in my writing, the childhood fears, have been influenced by his stories. And I believe that the most important rule in writing is show, don't tell. I think Ray Bradbury does this better than anyone else. His writing taught me that the difference between showing versus telling is like the difference between watching a movie yourself versus listening to someone tell you about it.
Okay, that's all the time we have for now. Thank you for watching. For more information about Tony's work, visit his website at www.airshipeagle.com. And for more information on my work, visit www.jimbernheimer.com.